All right, today we're jumping into a pivotal moment in the fight against ISIS in Syria. We're going to look at a deadly attack, a president's promise of retaliation, and what happened on the ground right after. There will be big damage done. Pretty powerful words, right? That was President Donald Trump right after an attack on U.S. forces. So in this explainer, we're going to unpack that promise, the tragedy that led to it, and the really complex fight against terror as it was all being reported at the time. Okay, so let's get into the details, because to really understand President Trump's vow for retaliation, you first have to understand the attack itself. So what exactly went down? Well, from the reports, this wasn't some huge, drawn-out battle. It was a targeted ambush. You had a joint US and Syrian patrol doing something called a key leader engagement, and they were attacked by a lone wolf ISIS gunman. He opened fire but was apparently engaged very quickly by both American and Syrian soldiers and was neutralized right there at the scene. But the cost of that ambush was just heartbreaking. The attack killed 3 American patriots who were there in the line of duty, and it was this loss that really triggered that immediate, forceful response from the very top. And, to put a human face on this, one of those heroes was identified as 29-year-old Nate Howard. His loss, in the loss of his fellow service members and an interpreter, well, that was felt all the way from Syria to the White House. And that brings us to the official response. In the face of this kind of loss, the message coming out of Washington was completely clear and delivered with some serious resolve. So this was the promise President Trump made out in the open. It wasn't just a condemnation. It was a direct vow of retaliation against the people responsible. He made it absolutely clear a major response was coming. And look, these weren't just words. According to what sources were saying on the ground back then, this wasn't about some future action. The retaliation was apparently already happening. Now, this part is pretty fascinating because of how fast it all happened. A guest on a news program, somebody who had literally just gotten back from Syria, said that the president hadn't just vowed retaliation, he had, quote, begun implementing retaliation. So what did that implementation actually look like? Well, it was a massive, multi-pronged effort. Reports were describing major sweeps of cities, ISIS cells being arrested and neutralized, and both US and Syrian forces working together to go after every single related network they could track down. So the key takeaway here is this swift and very forceful response. But that kind of raises the question, doesn't it? What was the big picture here? Why would ISIS choose to strike right then? The reports at the time were trying to answer that exact question. I mean, what was the motivation behind this deadly lone wolf ambush? According to the analysis from that guest who had just been in the region, the motive was actually fear. The argument was that ISIS was, and these were his words, terrified of the alliance that was building between the United States and Syrian forces. It combined local knowledge with the power of the US military. But to really get the full picture of the American resolve in the area, you have to understand that this strategy wasn't only about immediate, forceful retaliation. It was really a two-pronged approach that also had this huge humanitarian part to it, designed to win hearts and minds and, undermine the very reasons that groups like ISIS can even exist. And the impact of that humanitarian work was pretty profound. It was reported that these efforts, by units like Force Armadillo, had saved an estimated 8,000 civilian lives. So this wasn't just some side project. It was a core piece of a long-term strategy to show American strength and commitment that went way beyond just combat. And we're not talking about abstract aid either. This was concrete stuff, breaking a horrific siege, making sure essential supplies like baby formula actually got to civilians, and opening up access for doctors to reach people in need. It shows a really comprehensive approach. You fight the enemy head-on, but at the same time, you build stability and goodwill. That's a different but just as important kind of resolve. Which really brings us to the heart of the matter. We see this story of resolute, swift military retaliation right alongside a deep commitment to humanitarian aid. It presents a complex picture of modern conflict, and it leaves us with a really critical question to think about. What does this dual mission tell us about the future of the fight against terrorism?